The drumbeat of the savannah was silent, and the wind held its breath as the old man Jacob leaned against the scarred trunk of a great baobab. He was a lion in winter, his eyes milky with cataracts, clutching a staff of polished acacia. Beside him the fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows of a coat, a garment not of simple wool, but a tapestry of the heavens. It held the deep violet of a brewing storm, the burning ochre of the desert sunset, and the emerald of the hidden oases. This was the mantle of the morning, and it was the spark that would set a family and a nation on fire. But to understand the glory, we must first taste the grit of the pit. Before we descend into the shadows of this ancient tale, if you feel the heartbeat of these African narratives, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join our tribe as we tell the stories that built the world. The air in the cistern tasted of copper and ancient, suffocating dust. Joseph pressed his spine against the jagged rock, his breath coming in ragged hitches. Above him, the sky was a taunting circle of fire, an unblinking eye of brass. He could hear them, his own flesh, his 10 brothers, their laughter echoing like the cackle of hyenas as they sat at the mouth of the well, tearing into flatbread while Joseph's stomach twisted into a knot of cold terror. They had stripped him. They had torn the colors from his back, leaving him naked in the red earth. "Where is your God now, dreamer?" The voice of Judah dropped into the dark like a heavy stone. "Do the stars bow to you when you are buried in the belly of the world?" Joseph did not answer. He closed his eyes and saw the vision again, the 11 sheaves of wheat standing tall on the golden fields, bending their heads toward him in a silent, divine salute. He saw the sun and the moon and 11 stars shivering in the black velvet of the night, lowering their light to acknowledge his own. It wasn't pride that had made him speak of these things to his kin. It was a fire in his bones, a message from the great architect that he was too young to carry with grace. In the silence of the pit, that fire felt like nothing but cold ash. The rhythmic clinking of camel bells and the low groan of heavy carts broke the heavy tension of the afternoon. A caravan of Ishmaelite traders appeared through the shimmering heat haze of the Rift Valley, their skin like polished ebony, smelling of frankincense and the salt of the Great Sea. A deal was struck in the flickering shadows of the thorn trees. 20 pieces of silver, the price of a bruised slave, clinked into a leather pouch. Joseph was hauled up, not into the warm embrace of his father, but into the iron bite of a captive's chains. He looked into the eyes of Reuben, of Simeon, and of Levi, and saw a darkness deeper than the well he had just left. As he was dragged behind a camel, his feet blistering on the scorched soil, he saw his colorful coat lying discarded in the dirt, drenched in the warm, iron-scented blood of a goat. The lie was already being woven. The boy was dead, they would tell their father. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, a voice in the wind whispered to the boy in chains, "The coat was the shadow. The dream is the substance." Years bled into a decade in the shadow of the pyramids. Egypt was a kingdom of stone and gold, a world of high rituals and deep mathematics. Joseph, now a man grown, bore the mark of his exile, a crescent-shaped scar on his temple from the journey's hardships. But he also bore a wisdom that could not be taught. In the house of Potiphar, the captain of the guard, Joseph moved like a silent leopard, turning every loss into a harvest. He mastered the complex tongue of the Kemetic lords and the accounting of the royal granaries. He was a slave, yes, but he walked with the quiet thunder of a king in waiting. Yet the serpent always waits in the garden. Potiphar's wife reached for him in the silk-draped shadows of the villa. "Betray your soul for a moment of heat," she urged. But Joseph's spirit was as unshakable as the great baobab of his youth. He fled, leaving his linen cloak in her grasping fingers, and for his righteousness, he was rewarded with the suffocating darkness of a state dungeon. The prison was a pit of a different kind, a place where the Nile's dampness seeped into the marrow of a man's bones. But Joseph did not wither. He became the light of the ward. He sat with the broken and the condemned. When the king's cupbearer and his baker were cast into the cell, tormented by dreams that tasted of destiny, Joseph read the symbols like a map. He predicted the restoration of one and the finality of the other with a chilling, divine accuracy. "Remember me," Joseph had whispered to the cupbearer as the man walked toward the light of freedom. But the world is a forgetful place for a man buried in the earth. 2 more years of silence followed, 2 years of the architect's hammer hitting the anvil of Joseph's heart. Then the great Pharaoh began to scream in his sleep. He saw 7 fat cows rising from the reeds of the Nile, followed by 7 skeletal, monstrous beasts that devoured the healthy ones. He saw 7 full ears of grain, swallowed by 7 scorched by the desert wind. The magicians of Egypt stood silent. Their gods were made of stone and could not speak. The cupbearer finally spoke the name that had been buried in his memory. Joseph was brought from the depths. They shaved his beard, they anointed his skin with oils of myrrh, and they placed the heavy copper torque of his ancestors around his neck. He stood before the most powerful man on the planet, not as a prisoner, but as a pillar of truth. "The dreams are won!" Joseph's voice rolled through the hall of pillars like distant thunder. 7 years of overflowing abundance are at the door, but they will be swallowed by 7 years of a famine so hollow it will eat the memory of the harvest. You must store the grain. You must find a man with the spirit of the living God to hold the keys to the storehouse. Pharaoh looked at the Hebrew and saw what the 10 brothers had been too blind to see, the favor of the architect. He took the signet ring from his own hand and slid it onto Joseph's finger. He draped him in the finest linen of the realm and hung a chain of solid gold around his neck. "Only I shall be greater than you in this land," the king declared. The famine arrived like a slow-moving plague of dust, turning the green lungs of the earth to ash. But Egypt was a fortress of grain. Joseph sat upon the high stone dais, his hand controlling the pulse of the ancient world. And then one scorching afternoon, 10 men arrived from the north, their robes tattered and their faces gaunt with hunger. They bowed face down in the red dust before the great vizier. They did not recognize the man in the gold. Joseph's hand trembled. The very men who had sold him into the dark were now begging him for the breath of life. He did not strike. He led them through a trial of shadows, testing their brotherhood until he saw the shift, the way they stood before him, willing to sacrifice their own lives for the youngest, Benjamin. He saw that the brothers who had torn the coat were now men who would mend the heart. Joseph ordered his guards to leave. In the sudden, ringing silence, he began to weep. "I am Joseph," he cried in the tongue of the savannah. "Does my father yet live?" The brothers froze, expecting the glint of an executioner's blade. Instead, they felt the crushing embrace of a brother who had traveled through hell to find his throne. "Do not be hollow with guilt," Joseph whispered. "You intended it for evil, but the architect intended it for the salvation of many." The pit was the path to the palace. The story did not end in a grave, but in a reunion that shook the hills of Canaan. Jacob was brought down to Egypt, his old eyes finally seeing the face he had mourned for 20 years. The colorful coat was a tattered relic of the past, but the tapestry of the dream was finally complete. Lessons from the life of Joseph. The pit is not the end. Your lowest point is often the foundation for your highest peak. The architect uses the dark to strengthen your spirit. Integrity is a shield. Doing the right thing when no one is watching, as Joseph did in Potiphar's house, builds a character that no prison can break. Preparation meets opportunity. Joseph didn't just interpret a dream, he provided a solution. Success comes to those who are ready when the Pharaoh calls. Forgiveness is true power. Revenge is easy, but mercy is divine. True leadership is shown when you have the power to destroy your enemies, but choose to heal your family instead. Trust the grand tapestry. In this year, we often see only the tangled threads of our struggles. Joseph reminds us that the master architect is weaving every thread of betrayal and hardship into a masterpiece of purpose.